and get caught up. Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Diversity Coalition's series on information for small businesses. And today we are so fortunate in that we have the good graces of representatives from the Federal Trade Commission, one of the premier watchdogs for consumers and businesses in the United States, with us today to go over security for small businesses, and in particular internet security for small businesses and for other organizations such as nonprofits. This is a vitally important thing in that over the years, as larger companies have become more adept at their own security procedures, we are now finding ourselves in an environment where the juicy targets for the hackers, the thieves, the identity theft, the scams that I'm sure everybody finds in their inboxes at all times, trying to get to you and your constituents, or to your treasury, or whatever, and the ransomware people that are forever trying to get into your systems. This is that they're starting to favor going for smaller businesses and nonprofits, because they tend to be less protected, because those kinds of organizations just don't have the staff to protect themselves with dedicated departments like other ones do. So this series, and in particular this module, is we believe a vitally important piece of information that is going to be shared with you today. And the people that we have that are doing it have long experience in the run up to this. I was informed that one of our speakers today, Leslie Fair, has actually been doing this about the same amount of time that I have on the internet, and has brought her first case for the FTC on the World Wide Web, or as it was then still sometimes known as the Information Superhighway, in 1994, about the same time I was recruited to do this type of work on the business side. And so like there's a lot of experience here. There's a lot of insight here. You're going to hear such material, and some of it will be scary. Some of it will be all of it will be pertinent, and not some of it. I mean, there's nothing I've ever heard the FTC that just doesn't make you go like, I need to think about that, and will be useful to everybody that is listening in on this webinar today. And I say that with absolutely no reservations. I know how important this information is, as having been a CTO for many years of my career. And this is going to be a golden nuggets session for you. So without further ado, I would like to introduce, and it is my honor to introduce, Leslie Fair and Rosario Mendez from the Federal Trade Commission to do their presentation. Go ahead, Leslie.
Sharing my screen now. Thank you. I assume you all can see what's on my screen. Dennis, can you confirm?
Yes, I can confirm. We are good on screen.
Thank you very much. The FTC, Bureau of Consumer Protection, has worked with the National Diversity Coalition individual members, as well as a group for many years. So it's a real delight for us to participate here. And I'm always thrilled to be working with my good friend and colleague, Rosario Mendez, on this. The FTC is a law enforcement agency, but let me make it clear, we're not a gotcha bunch. Yes, the FTC has brought more than 200 law enforcement actions vindicating your rights as consumers when it comes to data security and privacy. But our goal, especially in talking to small businesses, is to emphasize what we can do to help. As Dennis very correctly said, the hackers, the scammers, and the fraudsters have learned that they are up against, especially when it comes to Fortune 500s and big companies like that, they're up against companies that invest millions of dollars into data security. And I'm glad they do invest that money. So what they've realized is that smaller businesses, nonprofit organizations, obviously don't have the budget for that. But when I talk to small businesses and NGOs, they often say, we can't afford to be thinking about data security. I think our response to that is, you cannot afford not to be thinking of data security. And so, both as a small business or an NGO, this is something you need to be concerned about. I realize a lot of you, however, are also very active with nonprofit groups in your community. If you can believe it, we have seen these kinds of scams perpetrated against elementary schools, against homeless shelters, a number of them against houses of worship. And, there really has to be a pretty low level in the circle of hell to be picking on folks like that, but we know it happens. So I would suggest, not only in your role as, let's say, a small business person or an executive with an NGO, but please don't underestimate the credibility you have in your community as a business person or an executive, how you can set the stage to put security first, also at the charitable organizations or other groups that you work with. And we really rely on your continued cooperation in that regard. Here's the scary part. Dennis mentioned there'd be a scary part, and this is it. The threats to sensitive data are staggering. Yes, we hear about ransomware attacks. We hear about sophisticated sorts of forms of data breaches. It can happen to anybody. I once heard a Silicon Valley executive say that there are two kinds of companies: those who have been the subject of data breaches and those who have been the subject of data breaches and just don't know it. The same can be said for government agencies and nonprofits. So, who among us has not left a document in a photocopier at the office? Who among us has not printed a document and maybe thrown away a misprint in a business center at a hotel during a conference? There's so many ways that bad things can happen. It can even be, and this is the part that I think is very troubling, it can even happen in-house. We find out that there is a rotten apple in the barrel, somebody perhaps who's leaving the entity and takes with them, okay, let's use the word steals, a vast majority of personal information. Or it could be someone who is, just not following your standards about using flash drives or clicking on links in email. So it's not just fraudsters and scammers. A lot of times, to use the old line from the Pogo cartoon, we have met the enemy and he is us. Sometimes it is inadvertent mistakes by staff, and we hope that there's a lot we can do in that area to be of assistance to you. We've boiled it down to the FTC to 10 basics. Rosaria and I are going to go through them briefly. First, just certainly start with security. Limit what you collect in the first place. Store what you keep securely. Require secure passwords. Control access on a need-to-know basis. All access backstage passes are great if you're going to a concert, but not at your place of business. Monitor your network for the best security, especially at a time with remote access that many of us have at our place of business. Be very careful about securing remote access. Make sure that you are implementing security practices with your vendors. A number of FTC cases make that clear, especially for those of you who outsource, let's say, the development of an app at your company. Securely dispose what you no longer need. Keep your security current and train your staff. I'll use just a simple example of that. I was speaking to a Texas financial institution a number of years ago, and one of the executives had actually won the Texas State Fair bake-off for blueberry muffins. My guess is those are darn good blueberry muffins. But once a quarter, she would get in very early, and for every employee that had a clean desk, meaning that sensitive materials was locked in your desk, she left them a muffin. Now, am I suggesting that the Federal Trade Commission has a muffin policy? Of course not. But what I'm suggesting is, what resonates with your staff and your employees. Sometimes a dozen donuts in a staff meeting is one of the best investments you can make in data security. And finally, the point we're going to finish with is this isn't just about networks. This is about paperwork, your office premises, and your devices too. Let's start with the beginning. Start with security. Don't collect sensitive information in the first place if you don't have a legitimate business need for it. I know back when Dennis and I probably started in this area, the feeling was the more you collect, the better. Whether we need it or not, let's collect it. That is so 20th century. That's just not the way you ought to be approaching data now. Because let's face it, data you don't collect is data that you do not have to be careful about how you secure it. And so I know it may seem at some point in the future you might have a need for it, but most importantly, start with security. If you don't have a legitimate business need, why collect it in the first place? You also want to make sure to store what you keep securely. Ensure proper configuration of security features and industry accepted methods. This is not the time to reinvent the wheel. Most of your, let's say your virus protection, your anti-spyware protection, things like that, most of them come with some pretty good built-in features. There's no need for you to start at the beginning. For your own protection, you want to back up your network files securely. We're going to talk about spyware. Obviously, that's a tremendous concern. Hospitals, nonprofits, and small businesses have been big targets of that. And it's troubling when that happens. But if you have your network files backed up securely, the one thing you don't have to worry about is rebuilding your business from scratch. Consider the use of encryption and VPNs, virtual private networks. Anything that you can do to lock down the information you have most effectively, we do suggest is something you want to be careful about. Here's something that's kind of a newer concern, but exercise particular care with highly sensitive data. Now, I use the example of health or financial information. Those of you who watch what's going on at the FTC, there have been a number of cases, about a half dozen in recent months, dealing with consumers' health information. The FTC took law enforcement action against a very well-known name that provides online psychological and counseling services. It's a company you've heard of. And of course, during COVID, their business went way up. But what we found out is that they promised consumers that their information would be private, and yet through their app, the FTC alleges that the company was actually sharing information with social media platforms. Just as a consumer, would any of us be willing to use that kind of service without that promise of security? So the FTC took action against that company, along with a number of other companies who were very big names in the health arena. But bear in mind, a lot of the information at your place of business includes highly sensitive financial information. I'm thinking of what you need to collect just as an HR function. W-2s with social security numbers, with health insurance numbers. So anything with health or financial information ought to be considered, the security of that ought to be considered very, very important. The other point I want to make with regard to store what you have securely is to keep your guard up when data is in motion. Certainly, if you're emailing stuff from one office to another and it's highly sensitive, just sticking it as an email attachment may not be the best bet. There are ways that you can use more secure methods to keep that to keep it out of the wrong hands. I think I'm not asking for a show of hands because I'd have to raise mine. The number of times the auto inclusion function, you may be sending something to B. Smith at your office, and it goes to B. Smith, another B. Smith that's also in your contacts list. So to be very careful about that, using encryption, using encryption and other means when information is in motion. Let me give you kind of an object lesson in this, and this was actually a California case. I call this the mysterious case of the purloined backpack. This was a company that collected cord blood data. And of course, this is women who are pregnant may maintain umbilical tissue for reasons in the future. And you can imagine that that company had access to a lot of very sensitive information. The company thought it was doing the right thing, that it needed to transfer the information from one office to another office across town. It gave it to a trusted employee who put the information in their backpack, who then started to drive across town and made a little detour for lunch, let's say, leaving the backpack on the front seat of the car. Of course, when they returned, the backpack was gone, meaning that that information had been stolen by somebody. Now, even if that information is not ultimately used for bad purposes, we think that's still injury to consumers. And let's face it, there have been a number of cases when stolen information has been used in ways that are very detrimental to consumers. The FTC brought a case and litigated a case up to the second highest court in the country, dealing with a hotel chain that experienced not one, not two, but 3 data breaches that resulted in consumers' financial information being found on a Russian website. We suggest that no good was intended with something like that, but this just lets you know the kind of risks that can happen in this area. Let me go to point number 3. I know we've all heard, my gosh, how many passwords do we have these days? But it is critical to insist that your employees or anyone with access to your system uses complex and unique passwords, or these days, kind of the buzzword I think is passphrases, something that may be easier to understand and to store those securely. So I think by giving folks in your office, I mean, certainly the longer is better. I know a lot of people who use kind of favorite song lyrics, but interspersing them with letters and exclamation points or things along those lines. Passphrases may well be easier for employees to remember, but all of that does no good if those passphrases or passwords aren't stored securely. Another point to consider, and I'm kind of going out of order here, is to consider enabling multi-factor authentication to protect against stolen identities, brute force attacks, and reused passwords. The reused password problem is a real issue in FTC law enforcement action. And again, you're not under oath because I'd have to raise my hand. The number of us who have used a password on more than one location. And here's the problem. Scammers know that consumers will often use the same password, not only on, let's say, a membership site or a retail site. That may be the same thing they use for their health data or on their bank account information. So they'll steal passwords from, let's say, a retail company, and you're kind of like, does anybody really care, where I buy my jeans or something like that? What they're really after is to then plug those passwords in to banking or other very secure locations, banking on the fact, no pun intended, that a lot of consumers recycle their passwords. This actually resulted in a major law enforcement action that ultimately settled just this year because a high corporate official at, again, a major national name about, reused their password in a way that, reused their company password in another area. Bad guys got a hold of that password and used it to not even break into, because heck, all they had to do was type in the password, the company account and the company network. So using those multi-factor authentication, and really emphasizing to staff the problem about reused passwords. Lock users out after multiple unsuccessful login attempts. I know this is a little difficult for all of us. Of course, every now and then you leave the caps lock on or you may mistype a password. But here is a case probably about 15 years ago against another company name you would recognize. This was a major platform, and the company did not stop after 3 or 4 incorrect login attempts. Scammers and hackers and criminals have got readily available on the dark web software that simply puts in every permutation of letters and numbers until they can break in. Now, after 3 attempts or 4 attempts or whatever your office chooses, they should be locked out, because that's a great way around these kinds of dictionary attacks, as they're called. This company did not do that. As a matter of fact, this company at the time had their corporate login admin site available from the homepage of the company. And as a result, this thing I think is very interesting. You'll know how long ago it was. What the hackers did is they took over the accounts of then President-elect Obama and also Fox President Rupert Murdoch. And they used those sites to do a phony promotion for free gas gift cards. Now, I will say, I'd like to think I'm never going to break into a president's webpage. I'm sorry, feed, social media feed. But if I did, I don't know if I would use it for that purpose. I think I'd have more interesting and creative things to use. Maybe that's just how my mind works. But it's an important message about making sure that you limit access if people don't log in correctly first time around. Rosario, is this where you're going to take it from?
Sure. Thanks, Leslie. So point number 4 is control access on a need-to-know basis. So thinking about limiting access to your network will help you also protect your data and your information from the prying eyes of outsiders. But of course, what about your own employees? Leslie talked a little bit about this during her introduction. And I want to reinforce it here that not everyone on your staff needs unrestricted access to your network and the information stored in it. So maybe think about putting some controls in place to make sure that employees have access only on a need-to-know basis. For example, if employees don't need to have access to personal information to do their job, then there's no need for them to have access to it. So consider having separate accounts is one solution to limit access to the places where that personal data is stored, or to control who can use that particular database, for example. Also limit administrative access. Administrative access, which allows a user to make system-wide changes to your system. I think that also should be limited to employees that are tasked to do that job, and not perhaps to all of your employees. Take into consideration that if your business is dealing with financial data, with health data, or kids data, the standards and regulations that are applicable are more complex than this. So make sure that you understand that you're complying with those applicable standards in terms of controlling access on a need-to-know basis, and limiting administrative access and limiting access from other employees. Next slide. So point number 5 is configure and monitor your network for superior security. So this comes when designing your network. When you're designing how your network is going to go, consider using tools like firewalls to segment your network, thereby limiting the access that I mentioned between maybe computers within your network and between the computers and the internet. Another useful safeguard is intrusion and detection and prevention tools to monitor your network for malicious activity. So, like it says on this screen, open concepts are great for kitchens, but not so great for networks. So segmenting the network is one way to help reduce the impact of, a breach or if someone is accessing sensitive data. It's also important to monitor activity on your network, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But watch for the unusual entries and exits of people and data. Consider using endpoint detection and responses tools. So making sure that you have a system in place that monitors for unauthorized access to your network routinely is going to be important. Hackers exploit weaknesses, so it's important to check your network for unauthorized users or connections regularly. For example, even investigate any, for example, on a regular basis, for example, but also to investigate any unusual activities that you detect or that your staff detects. Next slide. Slide number 6 is our point about securing remote access to your network. We know that employees and vendors may need to connect to your network remotely, but also know that breaches sometimes happen through these remote connections. So it's important to make sure that employees and vendors follow strong security standards before they connect to your network. And always change any preset router passwords and the default name of any router. That's a very simple thing to do. And sometimes, we all forget to do it. So it's really important to remember to change any preset router passwords and to change the default name of your router. Also keep the router software up to date. That's going to be important. And you may have to visit the router's website often in order to do so. So consider, a remote access is a common entry, as it says on the slide, for ransomware attacks as well. So that's why it's also going to be even more important to make sure that you secure remote access to your network. So a few things to consider. Consider enabling full disk encryption for laptops and other mobile devices that connect remotely to your network, and check your operating system for this option. And this will protect, enabling full disk encryption will protect any data that is stored on that device if it's stolen or lost. This is obviously especially important if the devices that have sensitive information in it. Another thing to remind employees or to train employees to do is to change the smartphone settings to stop automatic connections to public Wi-Fi. So I think that now we are saying that Wi-Fi, if you're using an encryption, an encryption or a VPN, like Leslie suggested, it's fine to be in a public Wi-Fi, but it's still as a precaution, maybe, make sure that where are you being connected. And obviously keeping up to date to antivirus software on any of the devices that connect to your network is going to be incredibly important. Next slide. So make sure, the point number 7 is to make sure that your service providers implement reasonable security. So a big issue for small businesses sometimes is vendor security. You may have to use vendors for payroll processing, for heating, for cooling, for anything else. But you don't want that vendor to be involved in a data breach at your business while it's connected to your business. So because customers are going to blame you, even if the vendor was the root of the problem. So some things that you can do to make sure that you kind of monitor your vendors first is putting it in writing. So conduct due diligence when you're selecting the vendors and ask a lot of questions and then put everything in writing. So spell out your security requirements in the contracts with the service providers. For example, include provisions for security, like a plan, a security plan to evaluate and update those security controls. Since all the threats are changing often, make sure that security provisions are that are critical to you and to protect your data are completely non-negotiable. Like you stick to the kind of security that you want your vendors to have, to be able to have as well. And also verify compliance. Establish a processes so you can confirm that the vendors are following the rules and following what they said that we're going to do. Don't just take the word for it. And remember to make changes as needed, because things change, cybersecurity threats change rapidly. So make sure that your vendors keep up their security up to date, and that you are constantly kind of monitoring also that contract if there's new threats and new in the environment. Next slide. So this slide has to do with kind of like the questions to ask a prospective web host company. So you may want a new or updated website, and you're looking to hire a web host provider. And when you're doing that, you may want to make sure that you ask sort of the right questions to make sure that that web host provider is going to give you a web presence and a network that has the security that you want. So these are some of the questions that we suggest that you ask. For example, ask if the host provides what is called TLS, or transport layer security. You may have heard of SSL, but TLS is like kind of like the newer version of that. It makes sure that customers that get to your real website and not to maybe a spoof website of your website. Ask about email authentication. Also ask who will be responsible for the software updates. Do you have to do software updates regularly, or is the company that you're managing and going to be responsible for doing that for you? Are they going to be set up to be done automatically? And who will be responsible ultimately for making changes to the website when you need it? Is that going to be your responsibility, or are they going to do that? So those are just some of the questions that you want to ask before choosing a web host. We have a lot more information on our website at ftc.gov/smallbusiness for this particular topic and a lot of the other topics that we've mentioned in here. Next slide. Our point number 8 is securely dispose of data when you no longer need it. This is super important because cybersecurity begins with strong physical security. So, for example, if there's documents laying around that haven't been shredded and they are misplaced, Leslie mentioned this earlier, that can be a minefield for a criminal, right? So don't toss sensitive paperwork in the trash. Train your employees also to shred documents. Always shred documents, especially if they have sensitive information, before throwing them away. And erase data correctly. A lot of times, the companies change computers or change cell phones, on a regular basis. So make sure that you use the software to erase data before you donate those old, devices, or before you discard any old computer, or even the digital copiers and drives. Digital copiers have information stored in there, so you make sure that you're erasing that correctly. Pressing delete is not enough. You actually need a software that is specialized for erasing data. And then, and I would also add that, have a plan. Know the response plan does happen where a device was disposed without being erased properly. Think of a plan of what are you going to do if that information is compromised. Next slide. Point number 9 is keep your security current, address vulnerabilities, and train your staff. All important points. We've covered them in some areas already, but I want to emphasize that keep your security current is so important because data security is an ongoing process. So it's important to have a systematic way to update your software and your patches. This includes in applications, web browsers, operating systems, the whole ecosystem that compromises your network. It's easy to set it up to happen automatically, so that this software just happens automatically. That's probably the easiest way, but you also want to make sure that it's happening on a regular basis. And if you do find any vulnerability, address it quickly. That is a really important thing. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, have a plan in place if something happens, if there's a data breach, if a device is lost that has information. have a plan for saving your data, so that you can keep your business running if you've been attacked by a ransomware attack, for example. And also have a plan for notifying your customers if there is some kind of breach. And Leslie's going to talk about FTC resources, but we do have resources to help you come up with that plan so that you have a what if plan in place before anything happens. Next slide. This is just one example of a company in the Equifax case. Is basically one example where the FTC alleged that Equifax failed to patch its network after being alerted, this was in March 2017, to a critical security vulnerability. So they were alerted of the vulnerability and didn't take the steps necessary to fix it. And in July 2017, there was then they discovered that the data breach that was still unpatched had been actually accessed by multiple hackers, and so there was a data breach that many of us were part of it. So it does happen. It's just one example. It does happen to big companies. Leslie talked about other companies that had some vulnerabilities as well, or cases that the FTC has established against big companies. We mentioned this because we can all learn from that, right? So if you're an entrepreneur, if you have a business, even if it's not as big as Equifax or the other companies that we've mentioned, these are kind of like lessons learned, right? So that we hope that that helps you, sort of learn, from these experiences, and then check your own, systems and make sure that you're taking care of any vulnerabilities right away, or that you are kind of on top of your cybersecurity. And hopefully this is a way to help you do that. So that's my last slide. Leslie, next to you.
I want to emphasize the point that we have made, that this isn't just about data security in the online sense. Certainly that's really important to us. But let's face it, crooks are looking for the easy way out. And if they can find information easily without having to do sophisticated stuff, why not? And that's why they often look to, paperwork, to phones, to flash drives. Why have to do something sophisticated when it's so easy? So our point is, the basic message, there is no way to 100% guarantee a hack-proof system. I wish there were. As soon as I figure that out, I'll let you know about it. But there's just no way to do that. What we want to do is encourage that our networks and other methods that we're making it look as unappealing as possible. The bright shiny apple with a worm in the middle is how scammers should be looking at our networks. That we are doing everything we can not to be the low-hanging fruit in this area. One useful way to do that is for companies to keep an inventory of the sensitive information they have and where it's located. We hear from a lot of companies, and I'll talk about the what if data breach in a second, that when they're breached, have no way of knowing what was taken. So I think making sure that you have a highly secure inventory is one way of doing that. I mentioned the clean desk policy that the Muffin Lady instituted at the Texas Financial Institution. But I think this is an important consideration to make sure that every employee has a secure place to put a wallet, to put a handbag, to put sensitive information if they go out to lunch. Where it shouldn't be is available to everybody. We'd like to think that every single person, every single colleague we work with, we like to be able to trust. But as the old saying goes, trust but verify. So even employees who may not be directly working with data, I think it's still a useful thing to make sure they have a locked desk drawer or a lockable, a lockable place, even if it's just a matter of losing a wallet or a flash drive or information like that, to make sure they have a safe place to put sensitive information. I'm going to follow up what Rosario has already mentioned about how important it is to securely dispose of documents and equipment when there's no business reason to keep them. As soon as the business need is over, securely get rid of that information. If it's paper information, we have a specific guidance for businesses. Simply throwing it in the trash isn't enough, obviously. If it's digital information, we also have guidance that Rosario has mentioned about how to do that safely and securely. But most importantly, make sure you are looking at your networks and at your file cabinets regularly to get rid of stuff that's no longer needed. If it's no longer needed and you securely dispose it, it no longer is going to be a headache to you if there is, God forbid, a data breach at your place of business. So data minimization is kind of, I would suggest, the buzzword of the day. It is a wise, practical way to approach data. It is the much more 21st century to look at what's going on, to minimize what you're collecting rather than simply trying to gather up a large cache of information. The case that kind of establishes this, these were law enforcement actions that settled against two major drugstores. Again, big names you have heard. When you get a prescription, they give you that printout with your name, maybe your health insurance information, what medication you're getting, and other, very sensitive information that you don't want to have in other people's hands. We've all had the experience, let's say, of printing something out and it printed kind of askew, or maybe the toner was running out. We allege in this case that the companies at issue were simply throwing those things in the dumpster behind their place of business. This is a very easy place where scammers and thieves go. And even if they aren't using the information, they may be selling the information to people who do. So this is one of those examples where not watching out for just paper records led to pretty serious consequences for the consumers whose sensitive information was breached. Let me talk a little bit more about how to protect, kind of equipment and paper. Certainly, first, store it securely. Paper stuff, paper files should be in locked file cabinets, locked rooms. At the end of the day, folks that are in the building after hours or kind of sneak in after hours shouldn't have access to them. Limit physical access. And I'll use the example of, let's say, your HR staff. There is no reason in the world that I need access to my colleagues' W-2s. So this is especially important for your own HR people or for people who are dealing with customer accounts that may have credit card numbers, social security numbers. Just make sure that even paper files are limited in the same way that Rosario talked about limiting access. Send reminders. Make this, let your staff know how important a priority this is for you. Make sure that they know that they are free if they spot something to speak up. I love my brothers and sisters at the TSA, and I wish I had thought of, if you see something, say something, as a good way to put it. They got it first, but I think that's something wise for you to put in place at your company. Your strongest links and your weakest links are your staff. And if your staff, to give them the training they need to to start with security and to put security first, and also let them know that they are welcome to come forward and will not be penalized, but in fact will be thanked if they spot a vulnerability in your system. They need to know they can come forward to speak about vulnerabilities. They are not putting themselves at risk, and that you welcome that. If they know it is your high priority, it goes way far to make it their high priority. And as I had mentioned earlier, make sure that you know where stuff is. After the fact, after a breach is not going to be helpful in this area. It's important for you to know in advance where that information is. So in case of a breach, you can reconstruct your business with a minimum amount of downtime. Now that we've gone through those 10, I think.
Hey, listen, I'm going to be here until close to 2, okay? Don't get nervous.
Okay, that's fine.
Go pick her out.
I like to leave at 2 to go get her.
Yeah, it'll be cutting it close.
Hey, Jack,
Yeah, that's fine. Do you want me just
please
to walk
mute.
up there?
I think we're hearing.
Okay.
Thank you. There are two
Apologies,
other,
folks.
aside from those 10 considerations, there are 2 other things you might want to consider. Of course, are you ready to respond in case of a data breach? And are you complying with the Fair Credit Reporting Act? 2 additional things to concern. My hope for you is that you never have to take a look at this slide again, and that you never have to look at the FTC's data breach response, a guide for business. Let's keep our fingers crossed, but we know that it takes more than just luck for that to be the case. It takes preparation. And as Rosario said, the best method is to plan ahead. Once somebody on your staff calls you at 3 a.m. with that oops call, that's not going to be the best time to start thinking about how you respond to a data breach. And that's why we suggest having a plan in place well in advance. What's going to happen if this occurrence befalls us? How are we going to respond? You want to make sure you have experts in place beforehand. If you have to respond to a data breach, you don't want to have to be calling that morning looking for national experts to be of assistance. So to have a plan in place, certain companies under specific laws, for example, the safeguards rule that the FTC has, some companies need to put this on paper. My personal suggestion is it's never a bad idea to put it in paper, but to have resources and people in advance who will be able, once you give, the whistle, will be able to assemble immediately in case there is a breach. And that's why if it happens, you want to mobilize your expertise immediately. They will be there on call for you. Certainly you want to put someone in place at your place of business. It may be you, it may be a tech person, but somebody needs to be in charge to mobilize that expertise. Certainly, job 1, I guess job 2 then is to secure your operations. Figure out what happened and secure those operations. It may require you to go offline for a short period of time, but the expert that you consult will help you with that. Certainly fix vulnerabilities. Once you figure out what happens, you want to fix it. The FTC has brought a number of cases against companies that found out about a vulnerability, but waited days or weeks or months and exacerbated the problem. And by fixing the vulnerability immediately, you can mitigate your own risks and the losses to customers and consumers. Also bear in mind the importance of making proper notifications. Every state in the country now has a data breach response notification law. California's was one of the first. California has an excellent website for those of you that are California based about how to respond to a data breach, what your legal obligations are. You can just put in a search engine, California data breach response, and you're going to get great information from your state attorney general. The FTC's data breach response guide is available on our website and can also walk you through some of those steps. May you never have to read it, but reading it now may save you lots of time and effort in the future. So my suggestion is to take a look at it, make sure that you are following those standards, that you have standards in place to deal with the things that I mentioned and that Rosario mentioned, that if the oops happens, you will be able to minimize the danger to your staff, to your customers, and to the overall health of your business. The other thing to bear in mind is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. This is a law that puts special data security provisions in place if you use information derived from credit reports. The industry calls them consumer reports sometimes, but you know what we're talking about. And let me tell you, I think it is a rare employer these days that does not run either a credit report or a background check on its employees. And once you do that, you have very specific things that you need to do to keep that information secure. If there's something on a prospective employee's credit report that raises a red flag with you, that is the reason why they might not have gotten the job, there are special provisions under the Fair Credit Reporting Act that you need to follow. The FTC has lots of resources about that. So even aside from that, the Fair Credit Reporting Act also requires businesses to help victims of identity theft. For example, if a consumer thinks that an identity theft was possibly caused either by something that happened at your company, or even let's say that they lost their wallet at your grocery store or something like that, the Fair Credit Reporting Act requires businesses to help consumers out. And wouldn't we all want to do that anyhow, just as goodwill to our customers and to our employees? The FTC took law enforcement action against a major national department store, again, a name you would recognize, because when consumers called up or visited and said, listen, I think somebody used my credit card illegally at your store. Can I have the receipt so I can challenge this charge with my credit card company? The company in question said, we don't do that for consumers. You have to have a lawyer contact us. Now, we certainly understand you need to make sure that this is not an imposter or somebody pretending to be a victim of identity theft. But if the person is who they say they are, and if they explain the circumstances, the Fair Credit Reporting Act does require you to cooperate and to provide the necessary paperwork so they can make that challenge. And bear in mind, these are people who are already been victimized by identity theft. I think there's not a family in America that this has not affected. I have been personally victimized in a tax identity theft scam. Luckily, I was, the IRS was very helpful in dealing with that. But, don't we all want to be providing benefits to consumers who have been victimized by identity theft, regardless of how it happened? I'll show you in just a minute where to get those compliance resources, but we do have special information for employers, for landlords, for background screening companies and others explaining obligations under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. I'm going to turn things over to Rosario in just a minute for a last word, but here are 4 sources of information that we have mentioned today. Certainly identitytheft.gov. This is a one-stop resource for victims of identity theft. Not only in your business capacity, but just as, family members, people in your community, as you hear about friends or acquaintances or employees who have been victimized by identity theft, send them to identitytheft.gov. That's where I went to deal with my identity theft problem. And I will say I was very satisfied with the results. Rosario mentioned, or at least, referred to a lot of what we have for small businesses. FTC.gov/cybersecurity. These are tech resources, but written for general business people by the FTC, the Small Business Administration, and other offices. Business.ftc.gov is where you can get general information about data security and privacy, as well as things like credit and false advertising, other things the FTC does. We have business.ftc.gov. Just scroll on down to our privacy and data security portal for the latest. And I would also suggest subscribing to the FTC's business blog at ftc.gov/subscribe. When you're there, we also have a consumer blog, which gives consumer alerts, which is very helpful. I will, in the interest of full disclosure, say that I am the FTC's primary blogger on the business side. However, I am delighted that Rosario frequently contributes too, but this is an easy way to get 500 quick words several times a week about what you need to know about data security, consumer privacy, false advertising, other issues of interest to businesses. I will make one guarantee. It is like no government blog you have ever read. I think Rosario will agree with me on that. But I think our consumer alerts and business blogs are useful things for you to know about. And those are 4 helpful resources. Rosario, do you want to talk about other resources we have?
Yes, just very quickly, I want to say you have to sign up to Leslie's blog. It is the best. And no one does it better. Leslie, we do have a couple of questions in the queue that I answered. I typed some of the answers, but there is one related to issuing checks or ACH. I don't own a business, so I wouldn't be able to tell you, but I am assuming that issuing a check would be easier if it's a one-time payment, and maybe ACH would be more effective or efficient if it's a payroll or on a regular basis. But I don't know that we have specific advice on that. But Leslie,
I think that is good kind of rule of thumb advice. And let me add, we're challenged with this issue too, because the FTC goes to court. And, when we can get money back for consumers, the Supreme Court has somewhat limited when we can do that. But when we can, we want to. And we struggle with this same issue. We are concerned about kind of fake check scams. We're concerned at the number of consumers who get a check in the mail and may be skeptical of it. But we also want to be very careful about sending emails to people with embedded links asking them for highly sensitive information. We think that is a real risk. And that, as part of your phishing education, a number of the cases the FTC has brought have, the problem, the ransomware, the data breach happened because of a phishing attempt that was successful. I think asking people for sensitive information via email is a dangerous proposition, and one that we do suggest businesses should think twice about, given the risk of spoofers and scammers and things like that. Let me turn things back over to you, Rosario.
Sure. So the last thing that I want to mention is that in addition to all the resources for business that Leslie mentioned, we do have a lot of resources for consumers, obviously, on how to protect themselves online, and protect themselves from scams, or how to spot and avoid scams in general. We also now have information in other languages other than English and Spanish. So a lot of the business information that we covered today, we have it available in Spanish, but now we have information in other languages. We started with how to avoid scams, what to do if you were scammed, and how to report it in multiple languages. The page is at ftc.gov/languages. We have information on 11 languages, and soon we're going to have, we also have information there about immigration, scams that target immigrants in other languages, but we are soon going to have information for small business in other languages as well. So as soon as we have that, I'll make sure to connect with Debbie and Dennis and everybody else so that they can make those resources available to you. But I want to make sure that everybody knows that we do have some information in other languages if you work with the communities that speak other languages.
Here's obviously how to get a hold of Rosario and me. You sign our paycheck. I can't guarantee you that Rosario and I are the people that will definitively have an answer, but we will do our best to get you closer to the folks that can. We also have a ton of materials for businesses, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel with training. We have the cybersecurity resources we have include modules for training and quizzes and one-page sheets designed for small businesses. So I think that's useful information. We're grateful, to the coalition for the chance to talk today. And I want to turn things back over to the coalition for final comments.
Perfect. Coming back on. Thank you so much. Hey, I have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you in particular for your comments, and one, and they're both best practices questions. The first is smaller organizations tend to have more people that are work from home, and also they can't necessarily afford company issued equipment, so there's a lot of personal equipment that is out there. Is there a resource somewhere in the FTC system that has guidelines and suggestions for how to manage those types of small businesses or small nonprofits that are so small they could be like very early startups but are growing? They're vulnerable too, where there's guidance on how to do the work at home, what's a good clean desk practice for home offices, and that type of stuff. And then I have a follow, and then I have another question after you finish answering that one.
I want to get Rosario's comments on this too, but a lot of what we say to small businesses applies when you're using personal devices. Virus protection, anti-spyware protection, and especially folks that may be using family computers. Who knows what 13-year-olds are doing on the family computer? You need to be able to use the same kind of segmentation and security at home, that you would use for small businesses in the office. At the beginning of COVID, we issued a lot of information on this subject because all of us were struggling with that. And I think those basic principles still apply. Rosario, do you have any additional suggestions?
Yes, I put it on the chat to visit ftc.gov/cybersecurity. We have a whole module on advice on a secure remote access to the network, so kind of like working from home. I mean, I think one of the most important things is about the router, like making sure that people at home have a router that have the right security, which WPA 2 or 3, and also that they are changing the passwords of the router, and that they are making sure that their computers, if they're using a personal computer, that the softwares are being updated automatically, and that they have antivirus in their computer. And if they're using a device that is provided by the business, also that those antiviruses and softwares are all being updated regularly. So there's several things on that module that can help.
Oh,
I'll
wonderful.
also mention that case about the hotel chain that had the 3 breaches. One of the concerns there was that the company did not have people change the router password, and they used the default password that came with the router. That's why we encourage, when you use that setup wizard, make sure you change the password.
Yeah,
Excellent.
because scammers know those passwords.
Yes, they do. I've seen that a number of times in the past in my own career, with telling people in other companies going, well, I'm in your network. What do you want me to do now? Maybe make that not happen next time I call. So my second question has to do with experts and resources for breaches and stuff like that. Does the FTC have some guidance, visibility, or best practices for small businesses or nonprofits that may want to get together and pool preparations together so that they access expertise together? Because the probability of one, these are very expensive services when they are required, and the probability of any one is relatively low. But as a way to make that happen, are there expert organizations that entertain pooled participations by nonprofits, pooled participations by under 10 employee type businesses that can make it a little bit more affordable to have the preparations to deal with this kind of stuff? I'm basically asking, is there a way to get the scaling effects of a large company when you're way too poor to afford it?
Yeah. No, our suggestion, obviously we can't recommend certain experts or anything along those lines, but this is where membership in statewide or regional-wide trade associations or business groups can be very helpful, because very often we have found that a state association of small businesses, to use kind of a generic name, can, as one of their benefits to members, can offer this kind of expertise. And so our suggestion is to, this is why it's useful to join, either local or regional or national associations or groups that can share that kind of expertise.
Yeah. Okay. Well, very good. Yeah. Well, that's a very good insight, because we do have a number of chambers of commerce that are attending today, and then, and NDC, of course, is also a hub and spoke type operation, and that's actually setting some wheels into motion in my head as to how to do this, because it's very, very daunting, as you know, to make these preparations, and very, very expensive, which is why people avoid them, and it also increases their susceptibility and vulnerability to these kinds of issues. So thank you very much for answering my questions. I mean, we're at 1:39, a little bit over on our hour allocation. So at this time, if it's okay with you, I would like to invite a couple of more members of our team to say hello and close us out. They've been on standby this entire time. Jack Miranda, if you could unmute and turn on your camera, and Faith Bautista, if you could unmute and turn on your camera. I know Faith and Rosario are longtime friends, so that would be good if you can. Otherwise, it's just Jack. But I'd like, we're at the point of closing remarks because we're so tight on time. But wow, what a lot of information packed into an hour. I mean, you look at the comments and stuff, and the private messages coming back. People are just wowed by the degree of Leslie in real time, as opposed to Leslie by blog. And by the way, I do subscribe to those things, and they are absolutely, you want like, hey, this is really, really useful stuff, right? It's and it's not dry. It's not written like it's written by a computer in the same form every time, like I don't know, like FinCEN, which is another thing where it's basically the same thing over and over. Which, by the way, I only watch to make sure that if my name appears, I know to skip the country quickly. That's kind of the rule of thumb when it comes to watching that agency's breaches and frauds and all that kind of stuff. I'm joking, of course, but Jack and Faith, if you could just pop in, say hello, and we really owe a level of thanks to these people. I'll turn over the end of the meeting to you.
Go ahead, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Pastor Jack. Go ahead, Pastor Jack.
Well, thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Rosario. Absolutely. The National Diversity Coalition is very interested in building trust. And so this is, we want to be the brokers between, especially the relationship we have with our communities and our governmental agencies and entities. I work with a lot of first generation folks, and they've come to the United States with the idea that we have the market share on what's fair and what's right and what's just. And so when they get scammed by their own here in the United States, it's pretty devastating. And as a faith leader, I like to focus on, there are these, I read this book pretty regularly, and it has this 10 commandments on it that say it came straight from God. And one of them is, thou shalt not steal. And so when too many folks break that commandment, we need each other. There's the time to just support, and how horrible it is. My daughter works for a medical center that just got breached. And August 3rd, and they're still not haven't recovered. And it's a large medical group. And so right now, I think it would be a slap in the face to send this recording to them, because it's a little too late. And I think the National Diversity Coalition wants to get ahead of things. And we want to get ahead of it, but it's really hard. to preach that. I always like to say this about a great quote. Mark Twain said, "I'm always willing to learn. I'm just not always willing to be taught." And that's why we only had about 35 folks on today. We needed a couple 35,000 here because this is a real issue. So thank you for taking your time. National Diversity Coalition is with you. And as soon as we hear from Faith, I'd like to close this out with a really short prayer.
Yes, I just want to encourage all the attendees that really pass this on. This 35 with the multi-level marketing approach, pass it on to your members, pass it on to your families. Every week, at least, I'm being called, identity theft, the senior citizen, the small businesses, especially now people working from home. And thank you, Leslie and Rosario for giving us that tips. You're right. There's no difference between working from the office and the small and from your home, but because we use the same computer, and unfortunately, the broadband is still not very strong to a lot of the rural areas and to the families. So there's still a struggle there. But I'm just encouraging all the attendees right now, the blog of Leslie. Those are the things that we can learn little here and there, because like today, it's information overload, right? But I think if we just sign up on Leslie's blog. So Leslie, can you please tell us again, what is the blog? Because I also want to sign up on that one.
Yes, ftc.gov/subscribe. We have a business blog. We have a consumer alert system. You'll want to sign up for those. For those of you like me who have been members of military families, we have specific things for members of the military community. We have things in Spanish. So you can go to ftc.gov/subscribe. Give it a try. We honor the Can Spam Act. So if you don't like it, we will make sure not to send you anything that you don't want. But, that is our best source of information.
Great. Back to you, Pastor Jack.
Okay, we're going to let you go. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Rosario. We are the National Diversity Coalition. We're unabashed in our faith rootedness. And again, we point to what's right, what's ethical, and what's moral, building trust. So we're going to rely on that and continue to push forward. So let me pray. Let me end us in prayer. Those of you guests, those of you online, we want to respect everybody's faith tradition, and we'll do that quickly. Creator God, you are the one who is just and right and fair, and that you would continue to help us in our efforts to treat one another with love and affection and just, Lord, honesty. Take us now into our day, into our evening. In your name we ask. Amen.
Amen.
God bless.
For those of you that are still here, this recording will be made available. Excerpts from it will be used to help spread the word. So we are dedicated to making sure that this information, because it is so valuable, gets out to more Americans. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.